Okay, now before we create a Kubernetes cluster on EKS, so we need to have a few things. Okay, we need to set up a, we need to install EKS CTL, and then we need to also install AWS CLI so that we can communicate from our local computer to the AWS, resources. So also we need to configure our AWS credentials. Okay, so that is needed for authentication to AWS resources, right? So let's go down here and see the setup part. So how do you install EKS CTL on Mac? Okay, before that, let's click here and see what EKS CTL is. Okay, so this is the official CLI for Amazon EKS. Now, it's a simple CLI tool for creating and managing clusters on EKS, okay, which is Amazon managed Kubernetes service. Okay, so basically, if we want to create and manage clusters on EKS, we can use this tool called EKS CTL. Okay, so how do you download this? So if you have Brew installed as a package manager, you can run these commands and install that. Okay, for mine, I have already installed. Okay, so just to verify, we have the EKS CTL running. So I can say EKS CTL and then version. So whenever I type this, if you see this version, that means we're good. Okay, now the next thing, let's go back to this repository again and see the next step. Okay, the next step is install AWS CLI. Okay, now okay, so we need to install AWS CLI. So if you click here, so this is going to take us to this page where you can see how instructions on how to install AWS CLI for different operating systems. Okay, so for Mac, so I followed these steps given here, and to verify that I have correctly installed this, I can do AWS version, and then this is going to print something like this. Okay, that means I do have everything configured correctly. Okay, let's go back here again, and the next step is we need to have AWS credentials configuration. Okay, so for that we will need the AWS access key and then secret key. So if you log into your AWS console, management console, let's go back here and let's log in. Okay, if you sign in here, you can skip this for now. If you go here and under accounts or security credentials, you can basically create your security credentials here. Okay, your access key, and then you can create access key, and then you can download it, right? So once you do that, you can go to your terminal again. Let's go back to this here and see. Okay, you can type AWS configure, and then you can provide your AWS access key, secret key, and the name of the region. Okay, so for mine, I'm gonna say it US East 1, right? So let's do AWS configure. Now this is, I've already put on my access key here and my secret key also. Okay, so and my region is also already configured, and the default output format, I'm just gonna press enter. So the default output format is JSON, so it's gonna give us the response in JSON format. Okay, now once we have this setup done, we can go ahead and create a cluster now. Okay, let's go back to the slide again and see the command for creating an EKS cluster. Okay, so this is basically the command for creating an EKS cluster. Okay, so EKS CTL, and then okay, with EKS CTL, one more thing I forgot to show. So one second, clear. So EKS CTL is used for creating a cluster. Then how do you communicate with the cluster? So for that, we need something called kubectl. Okay, so when you install EKS CTL, kubectl automatically gets installed on your machine. So if you have something like this, that means we're good. Okay, so kubectl is for connecting to the cluster, and EKS CTL is for creating a cluster. Okay, just wanted to make things clear on that part. All right, so EKS CTL create cluster, and then we can provide these parameters. Okay, the name of the cluster. So this is the name of the cluster we want to create, and then the version, Kubernetes version. Where do we want to create, on which region of AWS we want to create our cluster, okay? And then we can give the worker nodes some name, okay? Linux nodes, and then so that we can choose what type of EC2 instance we want to use as our worker nodes. So there are various types of EC2 instance, you can check them online. And how many instances do you want? So this is the command you can type from your terminal in order to create a EKS cluster. So this is one way you can do it, but in the real time, so this is not recommended. Okay, so people usually create a file, something like cluster config.yaml, and then they write all these things in a file. Okay, so all these details are going to be written in a file, and then we can run this file to create a cluster. Okay, so let's go back here again and see here. Okay, so I have already written this cluster config.yaml file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's go here, let's go to code here. I'm going to go here and just, okay, let's clone this repository first of all. So let's call it let's do git clone. Okay, now this is gonna, let's do cd EKS microservices deployment, right? Now if you do code dot, it's gonna open up this, VS Code for us. Okay, now if you go here, so this is the cluster config.yaml file. Okay, now here we specify the API version, what kind of a Kubernetes object is this, and then the metadata that we discussed earlier. Okay, so we can specify the instance type, desired capacity, and minimum size, and also maximum size. Okay, so at max we can have 3, and then we want 3 nodes created initially. Okay, we can play with these numbers, right? So now let's go back here, and also if we do ls here, we already have this file here, right? Cluster config.yaml file. So if you go back to this here, now we need to type eksctl create cluster, and then the -f, and then the path of the file, right? So we can do eksctl create cluster, and then -f, then we can do cluster config.yaml. Okay, now I'm going to press enter. Now this is going to create a EKS cluster. Okay, now let's go back to this AWS console here, and in top we can search for EKS. Okay, if we go here, as of now there is nothing, there is no cluster created, right? So this will take some time to create a cluster, and we should be able to see the cluster created, and also we should be able to see the worker nodes created. Okay, so this will typically take some time. Usually it takes 15 to 20 minutes of time. In the meantime, we can go and keep checking if it is creating a cluster. Okay, now we can see here. So this is creating a cluster called test cluster, because that's what we defined here, right? If we go to this file again, so this was the name of the cluster we wanted. So this is creating a test cluster. Okay, now also we can go to EC2. So this is the worker nodes, we can check here. Now as of now there is no EC2 instances created, but with time we can see 3 instances of EC2 nodes here, because we specified the desired capacity as 3. Okay, so we'll come back to this, but let's go to slides and talk a little bit about this EKS cluster. Okay, now once the cluster is created, okay, so this command is going to create us the cluster. Then after the cluster creation, a kubeconfig file will be available in this location. Okay, this kubeconfig. Now this file is basically a YAML file that stores information about Kubernetes clusters user and authentication mechanism, so that we can use kubectl to connect to the EKS cluster. Okay, so let's go back here and understand more things. Okay, so all right, now here, okay, so once we create a cluster, now we'll have something called kubeconfig file in the given location. Okay, and then this file is going to be used by kubectl, which is another CLI tool that can communicate with the Kubernetes API server. This is the master node. Okay, now kubectl is going to talk to the master node or the control plane, and it can deploy our application into the worker nodes. Okay, so that is the main idea. Now let's go back here. So this is the location. We're going to check if the metadata about the cluster is available there. Okay, now go back to this AWS console here, and still it's not showing anything. Okay, it must be probably creating cluster for us. And behind the scene, it's using CloudFormation, which is another service by AWS, in order to create the cluster. So so this is going to take a few more minutes. So I will be back once the cluster creation process is completed.